in this sector, and certainly for most of them, all of their lives. For others, then a large part of it, and certainly taking a big lead in terms of how we respond as an industry. So as I say, it's a great panel of speakers. We have Barry Clarke OBE, who will be talking a bit about brand strategy, how brands have developed their strategies, where they're going with it, and really then looking at the opportunity and the threat to people in the agency business. We've got Stephen Woodward, Chief Executive of the Advertising Association, also with us on this panel, who will talk about the industry response and some of the initiatives that are coming from the Advertising Association. And last but by no means least, we have Ben and Anna, who have formed a new organisation called ISLA, which are looking specifically at the way agencies can actually perform better in a more sustainable way. Now, what we've done is we've given each of these groups or each of these people 10 minutes to talk about what they're doing and how it impacts us. If during that time you could all remain on mute, that would be brilliant. But if you have questions as you go along, by all means populate the chat box. But we are hoping that we'll get 30 minutes of open discussion dialogue around sustainability. So you have a real opportunity to ask some of the industry experts their views and get some questions to them about the future of sustainability. So having said that, I'm going to hand over first to Barry Clarke, and he's going to talk about the brand perspective on sustainability.
Thank you, Graham, and good afternoon, everybody. In my little piece, I just want to talk about the degree to which sustainability really matters to big brand owners. It matters to all of us, of course, and there's a huge citizen movement pushing sustainability higher and higher up the public agenda. But the multinational corporations who control something like 50% of the world's wealth sort of understand it as well. And so what I'm going to try and do is just to give you a glimpse of what the major companies are thinking about, why they have put certain items on the top of their agenda. And then I'm going to take just 3 very, very quick case histories of brands that you will know and brands that seem to be leading the way in sustainability. So what matters most? Now, this is a field where you'll see a new opinion survey almost every month, where you'll see all sorts of data, statistics, and opinion. I happen to choose this one because it's the most recent. There's a piece of work produced by GlobeScan and Sustainability last month, and so at least has the advantage of being reasonably fresh. And out of their work, they concluded that there were three major sustainability issues that really mattered. One was climate change, no surprise there. Biodiversity loss, which has come way up the agenda in recent weeks, and I suspect that's largely down to the David Attenborough films that we're seeing, and there's a big move around biodiversity. And water scarcity. So those 3 issues remain absolutely at the top of the sustainability agenda, according to this latest survey. And that's pretty consistent with what we're seeing through other surveys over the course of the year. But the ongoing leader of the pack for some while has been climate change, and that still remains a pretty strong #1 concern for corporates. So just taking their perceptions, and this is purely a perception study about what really matters. You can see at the top there, in the dark blue, you can see the 2019 figures, and then in 2020, you see the comparable 2020 figures. So that with climate change, you can see it's been in the lead and still the major concern for over 90% of the people polled on this. Interesting to me, again, as I said earlier, is the growth in biodiversity loss. And I think people are beginning to understand that the planet is losing species at an intolerable rate. Water scarcity, which is important to me because I've been a director of the Alliance for Water Stewardship for some years, is coming way up the agenda, though still behind carbon and climate change. But the two aspects of water there, water scarcity and water pollution, both of which have pretty much the same net effect on populations and the planet. Now, the big growth area over the last year has been in perceptions of poverty. Usually, too often when people talk about sustainability, the assumption is that this is a discussion about the environment. Well, of course, it is to a large extent, but increasingly the issues of social and economic sustainability are coming higher and higher up the radar. And I think one of the things that I've seen most in the companies I work with over the last few years, how much concern for poverty, workers' conditions, modern slavery, these issues are all coming higher and higher up the agenda. And companies are becoming increasingly concerned about finding either child labor or indentured labor or forced labor in their supply chain. A big recent example might be the situation in Western China, where the Uyghur population, some million odd people, are generally believed to be working in conditions of actual or close to slave labor, as the Chinese government imposes its anti-terrorist restrictions across that province. So the poverty and the associated issues going with it becoming an increasing matter of concern and urgency for multinationals. So the same survey came up with a list of what it saw as being the companies who are the leaders in integrating sustainability into their business strategy. Now, for many, many years, sustainability sat in one place and business strategy somewhere else. They were two totally different things. Now it's about sustainability being part of the business, not something that you do as well as doing business. Remember, for ages, people talk about corporate social responsibility as though it were a separate entity. That's something, that's the good works you do in your spare time. That's all gone. Here in 2020, we're talking about sustainability as part of business, not as something distinct from business. So we had, among the people who are looking at this, year over year over year, one company stands out as a leader in its field. And since I suspect many of you will have some part of Unilever as a client, you'll not be surprised to see Unilever still rating very highly as a leader in marketing in sustainability. The rest of the list is, again, reasonably predictable. Patagonia has made its entire business case around sustainability. IKEA may be a little less obvious, but they, I guess, have almost a Scandinavian built-in feeling for environmental concerns in particular. And so there you see a list of what in this survey were the companies that came out as leaders in this particular respect. Now, if you look at other indices like the FTSE for Good or the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, you'll see different rankings, different orders, that all of these companies tend to feature at some level in one or other of these surveys. So just to say that there are significant brands, significant companies out there who are committed to sustainability as part of their overall strategy. And so I thought, just for a discussion starter, I'd pick out three of the names on that list, and the three of the names on this are all companies that I've been working with in one form or another over the last year. So I have some idea about the reality of what they're doing as well as the PR. So let's start with Unilever, since they came out top of the list. And their sustainability program is labeled the Sustainable Living Plan. And it sets out as a mission to decouple growth from environmental footprint while increasing positive social impact. And what that means is we think we can keep growing the business while doing less damage to the environment or to society. Now that's quite an interesting thesis, because and up until now there's been assumed that you can either grow or you can take care of the environment. Their view says, no, we can have it both ways. If we're smart enough, we can grow our business. We can have a good, profitable business for ourselves, our shareholders, and the millions of pension plans around the world that are funded into Unilever. But at the same time, we can do something about the environmental damage of our products, and indeed not only do something about it, but restore at the same time as having a positive impact for people. And they've come up with, like all good plans, 3 really simple big goals, easy to understand. And then underpinning those goals, they have nine commitments. Let's take a look. So real hard quantified numbers. Now, the mix here of 2020 and 2030 numbers. So by 2020, they're saying we're going to have more than 1 billion people take action to improve their health and well-being. And specifically, we're going to have goals around health and hygiene and improving nutrition, which seems to be absolutely bang on line with the main streams of Unilever's business. Health and hygiene, obviously flourishing at the moment with its investment in soap, detergents, washing equipment, and nutrition, obviously, because the core of their business is still in foodstuffs. For 2030, and 2030 is significant, I think, for most of you by now, because you'll know that's the end date for the current UN sustainability goals. So by 2030, their goal is to halve the environmental footprint of the making and use of our products as we grow our business. So they're not concerned here just with the environmental footprint of the manufacturing process or the production process. They're also concerned with reducing the footprint of the way their products are used. And so in that area, they're focusing on greenhouse gases, again, which relates to the first slide I showed you. Water use, again, high on everybody's agenda. But here we're also talking about waste and packaging. And again, that's had a lot of exposure lately, particularly in relation to plastics. And they're also driving specific goals around sustainable sourcing. Coming back to 2020, they're saying we're enhance the livelihoods of millions of people as we grow our business. So they're talking about fairness in the workplace, opportunities for women, and a more inclusive approach to business. So that is, in a single slide, a picture of Unilever's direction. Now try and hold as much of that in your mind as you can as we go on then to look at the IKEA group. Now their overall position is similar but different. They have their own way of addressing it. They're saying we want to be planet and people positive. Now this is quite important. This means we're not only going to stop doing harm, we're actually going to be regenerative. We're actually going to make things better. So we want to have a positive impact on people, society, and the planet. And for us, it's about balancing economic growth and positive social impact with environmental protection and regeneration. So again, these twin strands that you can grow your business and you can still take care of the environment and you can do good things for society. So that's their overall creed, and that's being delivered by 3 key strands. And again, these are very similar. I've used a similar color coding to the Unilever's approach. So healthy and sustainable living. So the lifestyle piece, first of all, will enable and inspire more than 1 billion people live a better life within the boundaries of the planet. So they're going for the billion. They want to be climate positive and certain by, and this is where the notion of a circular economy comes into play, because they want not only be positive, but they want to regenerate resources while growing their IKEA business. And then there's the notion of fairness and equality, of creating a positive social impact for everyone across their value chain. And their argument, if you look at the Venn diagram there, is that together the environmental, social, and economic ambitions together work together to create a better life for everybody. And the more successful they become, that Venn diagram actually becomes a single circle where all of those things overlay and are simultaneous and of a piece together. The third company I wanted to draw your attention to, again, one which I've worked with a great deal, particularly around water over the last year, is Nestle. Now, Nestle are in the food business, and they're unashamedly saying, therefore, our purpose is to unlock the power of food to enhance quality of life for everyone today and for generations to come. So this notion of future, which is really the core idea of sustainability. And it says, our approach creates value not only for our business, same message again, if you remember from the other two, creates value not only for our business, but for individuals and families, for our communities, and for the planet. Now, I think it's no accident all three companies have wording that is subtly different, but are all actually driving down very similar paths and priorities and setting themselves not dissimilar objectives. So in the way Nestle phrases them is that, they have a quantified ambition to help 50 million families, 50 million children live happier lives, now healthier lives, because bear in mind Nestle's product portfolio has a very high proportion of products which are aimed at children and young people, and they know they've got a problem. So they have this commitment to further decrease sugar, sodium, and saturated fat. And for many of us, I think it's fair to say they're not doing it quite quick enough. But they're also having to deal at the other side of this with the issues of undernutrition, particularly in the developing world. So they have a mission for families, they have a mission for the planet. And here their ambition is unequivocally zero environmental impact. So that again is around, particularly in their case, water efficiency and water policies. And they have gone to considerable lengths to go into a water stewardship program for all of their plants across North America at the present time. And for communities, their ambition is to improve 30 million livelihoods in communities directly connected to their business activities. So the important thing isn't the numbers, the fact is that all three of these organizations have quantified their goals, just as they may have quantified their business goals or their marketing aspirations. So in their case, it's about farm economics and it's about responsible sourcing. And again, you've seen the words about responsible sourcing when we were talking about Unilever. So three companies, three recognized leaders in sustainability thinking, who see sustainability as part and parcel of their business, not as something separate from it. So what does all this lot mean for you? Well, my contention is sustainability really matters to your biggest clients. And it's probably the second biggest item for most of them after customer satisfaction. I saw a survey from the fashion industry which said quite clearly number one interest was customer satisfaction, and number two, and not very far behind, was sustainability, which is why you're finding companies like Levi's now going into the jean rental and recycling businesses, as well as their normal standard business. So I think if that's the case, if sustainability really matters to the big brands, you need to know their sustainability policies, challenges, and opportunities, just as well as you understand their sales and marketing. You wouldn't dream of going advising them on their marketing strategy unless you understood their business plan. I would contend over the next few years, you're not going to get very far in a conversation about their sales and marketing unless you understand their sustainability policies and directions. Interestingly, most companies still struggle to communicate their sustainability advantage. Now, there's partly a reason this, because a great deal of the work on sustainability is done at the pre-competitive stage. All of the cocoa companies working together, all of the coffee companies working together, all of the cotton companies working together at the pre-competitive stage, at the levels of the of primary production. But beyond that, of course, then things do start to break out and become different and distinctive. And there are hardly any companies right now who are really confident in their ability to communicate clearly and positively their sustainability advantages. They are terrified of appearing to be greenwashing. They want to be clear, they want to be honest, they want to say the right thing, and saying the right thing is actually quite complicated. So there is a communication struggle. Many of these companies have an advantage. They're finding it really hard to find the best way of communicating it to their public. And thirdly, and this I think what Ala speaks this afternoon can be talking about, you need to show that you are acting responsibly. Can you evidence best practice in environmental and social responsibility in your agency? Can you show that you get it? Do you understand what's going on around you? Because you are going to be increasingly required to show what your environmental policy is, what your waste management policy is, what your equality and diversity policy is. So you need not only to have policies, but practices and real life delivery to show that you are a responsible and I hope sustainable business. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Barry, indeed. So a really fascinating insight into what brands are thinking and how that's all moving into the merging business planning and marketing, etc. With that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who has promised me he can do his bit in about 5 minutes, given that we did overrun just a fraction there. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephen, and I believe, Terry, you're going to share the screen for Stephen.
I sure am. I'm just getting it ready now.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Barry. That was really interesting. And I think what I'm going to hopefully do is answer some of those challenges in this presentation in terms of the work that we're planning. Oh, you're showing me as opposed to this. There we are. Lovely. Thank you. Can you go, Terry, can you go full screen? Thank you very much. This is I'm going to talk you through very briefly an action plan that we've been developing over the last year for the advertising industry to reach a target of net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And it's important to define what I mean by the advertising industry. This is basically the businesses that are involved in the creation and production and distribution of commercial content. So I'm using advertising as a very broad term there. We're talking about all commercial content here. And we think that part of our industry, so we have responsibility obviously for the sharp end of many, many thousands of clients' businesses, but we can't be accountable for how a car client or an airline or a food retailer or whatever is going to achieve their own goals. I do think, to echo Barry's point, is what we're seeing is terrific examples of leadership from across the brand and the manufacturer and the big company audience, and perhaps less so, but partly because we're a more fragmented business from the advertising business, albeit all the big groups have got ambitious climate objectives. So if we go to the first slide, I think the first thing to say is, this is a response. We started this work a year ago. Obviously, in the short term, you'll see that cartoon there. If you can just read the caption, be sure to wash your hands, all will be well. We've got to first of all get through the COVID crisis and then, the following recession. But actually, the thing that dwarfs all of those things, albeit they all feel challenging, is that climate change is the biggest single challenge we face. And I think this is the most important step that we as an industry can take, along with every other industry, And I'm very struck now by having been working in detail in this field for the last year. Is this is really, really urgent. This is not something that is down the line or we need to do by 2050. The sort of fall in carbon footprint that the lockdown achieved, which I think was 3 or 4% across a lot of Western economies. Barry will probably know that much better than I will. If we're going to hit net zero by 2050 as an economy, we've got to go down by 7% every year. When you think about the growth in the economy as well. So the sort of changes to the way we live and work and travel have got to be absolutely profound. So we set up 2 working groups about a year ago. One was a Climate Action Working Group, which met every month, cross-industry representative group, and they've been tasked with designing an action plan. And then we had a steering group, which was a broader group, both of our members and outside our membership, to in effect make sure that they feel that we're going in the right direction, but also to disseminate this plan that I'll come on and talk about in a moment. So this is really a report and recommendations for the industry's response to climate change. Great. Terry, if you can click on to the next one, thank you. And what we're looking to do is really articulate what steps that we can take as an industry to achieve, I think an ambitious but entirely achievable goal, which, Terry, next chart please, is real net zero by 2030. So that's not just about reducing our carbon footprint, but that's getting to something called net zero, where in effect the impact of your operations, first of all, to do this, you just don't just offset what you're doing already, you reduce down to as low as it possibly can go the carbon footprint of your operations, and then you only really offset what comes next, what you can't eradicate out of that, because there'll inevitably be some things. I think what's interesting, and again, Barry, you'll have seen this from other companies, but I look at people like Microsoft and I think Google are looking to actually move into carbon sort of consuming. They're actually looking to not only withdraw their current carbon footprints, but withdraw their historic carbon footprints, and then actually become carbon positive. So actually their operations are consuming more, are taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than are putting in there. Now that feels like exactly the right place for businesses like that to be, actually to making an impact, if you like, on the backlog of accumulated carbon in the atmosphere. But we're setting a target of real net zero by 2030. We think it is achievable, and we'll be outlining some measures about how we do that in a meeting in November, which I'm going to invite you all to at the end of this presentation. The thing that we've already gone live with, and Terry, next chart please, is something called AdGreen. You may well have seen this in the press in September. So AdGreen is a program to enable the advertising production industry to measure and reduce for a zero carbon, zero waste future. And of course, unless you're measuring, you don't know what you're reducing. So the first stage is to measure. So it will be bringing the whole ad industry together to do this. When we say production, we're focused on basically anything that involves a shoot. So whether it's motion pictures or whether it's a stills shoot, anything that involves a shoot, AdGreen will be able to be used for. So it has a carbon footprint calculator for any form of production involving a shoot. It will have a renewable energy buy-in scheme. It will have a certification offsetting scheme. And most importantly, it will have industry training. This is currently supported by 7 businesses from across the industry. So WPP, Unilever, of course, Sky, Mullen Lowe representing the Interpublic Group, Adam and Eve DDB representing the Omnicom Group, Havas globally, and a US production consultancy called APR. And we expect 2 or 3 more businesses to be joining that over the next few weeks. So ultimately, we'll have a cohort of about 10 businesses that are going to be developing this. Now, the important thing about this initiative is we are not starting from scratch. This is building on, we've created a partnership with BAFTA. BAFTA have the world's best carbon footprinting data for broadcast production. So they've got now nearly 10 years worth of data. It's called Albert, and it's called Albert for the obvious reason it was started by the BBC, and you can guess the program they first did it on, which was of course EastEnders. So they started calculating the carbon footprint of their production on EastEnders, and from that they've extended the scheme. Now all major broadcasters use it. And in fact, there's no UK production done for UK broadcasters that isn't Albert certified. And we want to move to that position where, in effect, that we get to a point of view where everything that the industry is producing, in effect, is validated and measured and certified through AdGreen. So the carbon calculator will be coming next year. The way it's going to be funded is by a small levy, and it will be a tiny levy. You know, we calculate it to be around about 0.008% of a production job. So you know, a few pounds on a production job. And then we'll have access to the calculator. The training will be free. We want to get as many people involved in the production of commercial content through this as possible. So that's in development now, and that will be launched in February. Sorry, in the spring next year. It is a major contribution to the carbon footprint. And if we click to the final couple of charts, so we are going to have a launch event on the 18th of November. We'll distribute details for how you can join that. It's a free event. The Alliance will distribute details about how you can join that. We want as many people as possible across the industry to attend that. And that's for all your staff as well in your agencies. We know from the research we've done that to echo again something Barry said, that sustainability amongst the people working in the industry is their #1 concern about what they do, about their day job. And we've got research to demonstrate that. We'll also be launching research to demonstrate an estimate of the carbon footprint of the advertising industry as it currently stands, and then what drives that. So you know, energy consumption, travel, other operations, and so on. So we'll be looking at the carbon footprint of the industry currently, putting some estimates out there for what that is per head, and then the action plan, of which AdGreen is one of 5 actions we'll be announcing on November the 18th. So please do come and join us, come and listen to the action plan. But of course, the most important thing is actually to take part in it. And it is actually very straightforward for businesses to follow. So look forward to seeing as many as you as possible at that event on November the 18th. Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Stephen. Excellent. Now we move on to our final speakers, Anna and Ben, who have created an organisation called ISLA, and we're delighted to welcome them here to give us some practical advice and guidance on how we can be more sustainable. Anna and Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Graham. Hi, everybody. My name's Anna. I am one of the co-founders of ISLA, along with Ben. If you want to say hi, so people know which screen to look at. Yeah, there you go. He's still muted. I'm just going to give you a quick overview about ISLA, and then I think Ben's going to talk about Barry's last slide a little bit more around the practicalities. So ISLA is a non-profit organisation that launched in September. It's similar to AdGreen in the sense that it's kind of a coalition of members, but it's specifically for the events sector. So whether those are kind of large international exhibitions or conferences, or right down to sort of more experiential based activations, that sort of thing. And the reason that ISLA was launched is because Ben and I both have a background in event production, obviously, and our key challenges as event producers, Ben's previously production director, was that there's just so much conflicting information, and there's a lack of standardization, which has really hindered progress towards actually delivering meaningfully sustainable events. And we've found that you know, whilst people are trying to be sustainable in their practices, whether that's on a shoot, on an event, on a film, actually there's very little guidance, and kind of through conversations with our founding member agencies. We have 12 founding member agencies, you know, and through our peers and general conversation over the last year that this initiative was in development, was that there's a lack of knowledge on climate issues. There's a lack of clarity on what is sustainability best practice. There's a lack of training on industry specific topics. You know, there is not any measurement tool that's specifically designed for the events sector. No standardization or benchmarking. You know, there's no industry-wide reporting. Basically, as an industry, we're very hidden in many ways, in the same way that advertising is very hidden, that it supports every other industry and organization and sector globally, but it's kind of a very hidden space. So we got together with 12 agency leaders in December last year, who are actually our founding members now, and we discussed about how can we transition the industry to a genuinely sustainable future. How can we provide solutions to these key challenges? How can we kind of provide the guidance and support that we need for the people on the ground delivering events? What do we need? We need knowledge sharing, measurement, standardization, and so on. And so we looked at how we could collaborate as an industry rather than be competing on what is, as Stephen said, kind of the single biggest issue of our time. We've got the pandemic, and we know that there's going to be, very difficult economic future, short to medium term, but climate change isn't going away. So we have spent the last year developing a range of resources to support event planners, event owners, agency teams, supply chain teams, that sort of thing, focusing on training and education. We're currently developing working groups on some of our key challenging topics that are being created in partnership with our members, understanding what their challenges are so we can problem solve them together. We're also developing a measurement tool specifically for the event sector that tracks your performance across travel, transportation, production, catering, energy, those sorts of things. We're developing standardization tools so that you can begin benchmarking your event against your method and your approach and your performance. And we'll be running a series of events and education programs and so on, so that we can upskill our teams so that they are able to respond to brand and client needs, which is really what Barry's key takeaway slide was about, is how can you best support your brands, how can you help them communicate their message, and so on. So that's kind of an overarching view to ISLA. You can visit more on the see more on the website, which is weareisla.co.uk, for a more comprehensive view. But Ben, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is sort of reference it back to Barry's slide, because Barry, you're totally right. All these brands have done so much work on sustainability across the past sort of 5-10 years. And what we've really found is that a lot of that work's been around their operations and their product footprint, as it were. And it hasn't really started to translate to their value chain or their marketing so much. So what that means is you'll have a brand wanting to be very sustainable in what they're doing and communicating that, but then not knowing how to follow through with their communications and their events. And what then that means is over the next sort of 2 to 5 years, that's going to change, and there's going to be a lot of internal pressures on brand managers to ensure that their events and activations are sustainable. And it's starting to filter down, but often the brand managers won't know what that means in an events context. We've talked about conflicting information and how important knowledge is, and without knowing how to solve those challenges for our brand managers, we're not going to be able to be the agencies that are going to be selected or be able to deliver work for them effectively. So one thing that's really useful to do is looking at brand sustainability policies and then working out how that will work within the work stream that you're delivering, whether that's a digital activation or an event or a shoot. So that's kind of the way that we're tackling it, is to upskill people and give people the training that they need so they can solve those challenges for their brand managers before it becomes a problem for the brand managers. So I just wanted to sort of tie it up really on that point, because it's really starting to happen. You see the leaders in the field of sort of event sustainability, they're coming through and they're starting to really know what they want in a brief. But a lot of the time you'll get requests from clients that will just say, make it sustainable, but they won't know how. And so really that's the job of agencies over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, to ensure that when sort of live events do come back, is that they can satisfy the client sustainability policies on the ground, essentially. That was pretty much what I wanted to wrap up. So I will can't stop the share.
So in terms of how to take that forward, one of the things that we've recognised with ISLA is, sorry, just one more thing, Graham. I can see that you were paused to finish it off is that really in terms of knowing those sustainability policies and kind of pushing it back to brands, it's really around that education piece that you can be doing as a team to deep dive into what your client's doing. So asking questions, understanding what their sustainability approaches are, what they want to achieve, rather than just you want to be sustainable. Is that through carbon neutrality? Is that through your waste profile? Is that through your plastic footprint? You know, to really understand, it's asking those questions, because you can't be an expert on this unless we start doing those deep diving and start asking that. We're not experts. We work in marketing, we work in events, we work in advertising. We're not sustainability experts. So starting that conversation with what does your brand actually want to achieve, and following through from there is the best point. And the second thing is about looking at how you achieve that and creating a plan with your clients, with your brands that they can buy into, where you can demonstrate for them exactly how you can help check those boxes off from their sustainability policy or their their charter or their roadmap, or what it is that they want to achieve, whether it's a shoot or an event or so on. So it's really about that understanding piece, creating a plan that they can buy into, and then creating a management plan that you can follow through and demonstrate that, which obviously sounds like a massive undertaking. It's not really a practical tip. 10 minutes is a bit of a tricky one to try and get it all locked into, but it's about that understanding and creating a plan. And I think ultimately that's so much about what Ad Green is going to be doing in terms of their training. It's really, how do you actually go about and do this? This is what we're doing with ISLA. How do you actually go about and achieve this? What are the steps that you can take that are practical, that enable you to respond to these requirements and these needs? That's it for me.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ben. Really enlightening, and I love the work you're doing. It's really fantastic. So, are there any questions coming up from anyone viewing this? I've got one question I'm going to put to Barry, basically, and that is, I'm really intrigued at the trend towards poverty and human trafficking and human slavery coming into the mix far more than it ever has. It's always, sustainability has always been sort of equals planet, green, that kind of stuff. So I'm intrigued as to what's causing that trend to happen, if there are any simple answers, Barry.
Yeah, I think the underlying it are some real political big news stories that tend to drive these things. And I think particularly over the last year, of course, with the impact of COVID, you've had huge impact on the poorest people in the world. And, you know, you see over 1 million cases in India, and those are the ones that are being counted. So the impact of all disasters, natural disasters, pandemics, is always falls most heavily on the poorest people in society. So I think that there's that factor. Secondly, more and more investigation is going on into the source of products, and particularly in the fashion industry. It is devastating for a fashion brand selling large volumes to younger users, for those younger users to find that that their latest T-shirt was stitched together in a factory in Bangladesh that fell down and crushed all its employees. And so I think that there is much greater awareness that that at the beginning of the production process, people are living in pretty miserable conditions and are being treated pretty poorly, and consumers don't like that. I mean, to put it very bluntly. So I think there's just been more awareness, and I think maybe it was the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh a few years ago that probably put the greatest shone the greatest light on this, and just the sheer misery in which people are working to stitch your jeans together started to ring all sorts of bells of conscience. But I equally think that there's also an understanding that somehow the economic model has to change, in the sense that you can't make all the profit at the last stage in the supply chain. and none of it at the beginning. So again, I just think there is a greater awareness that my £50 pair of jeans were stitched together by someone who probably got less than 10p for their labour on it. And I think that that's now becoming there's much greater transparency.
I think, just to jump in, I think in terms of what you're saying, Barry, is that really there's a conscious shift away from good business to what is business for good. How can we actually be producing or operating in a way that is for good, not just for the bottom line? So I think the idea of that shift from good business to business from good is quite a useful concept to understand and to mull over, and then see how that you can respond to that and respond to your clients' needs and your brand's needs when you're looking at it in that context as well.
Thank you, and I'm sure you're right.
Always am.
And I think, well, we've at the Alliance, we've developed 3 pillars from co-chairs to support our agency members, and one of them is around purpose, because we are seeing more and more businesses have a purpose which engages people within the organisations. Stephen, I'm going to turn to you, because I know at Cannes there was a demonstration against marketing and advertising being a force for bad, but I think there was recently a discussion in one of the council meetings that actually said we need to be a force for good. Can you just expand on that just a bit? I mean, where can we be a force for good?
Well, I think we're clearly a very high-profile symbol, if you like, of a modern market economy. In that you can't conceive of a modern market competitive economy without an advertising business. So, for Extinction Rebellion and others, they wrote a slightly student union-y type threatening letter to advertising, advertising we know where you live type thing. And they've mounted a protest in Cannes last year, and got slightly grumpy that the French police were not overly friendly towards them, unlike the British police, and gave them a fairly tough time. But there's a serious point there, which is that clearly, we are responsible for both driving consumption and competition and changing behaviour. And of course, the best thing that the industry can do is encourage people to adopt more sustainable products, more sustainable ways of living. And the two things are not incompatible. And I think Unilever are the absolute hero company from this, because they're looking to both grow and halve their carbon footprint. So they're not doing that by halving their business. And as the lockdown shows, the sort of route to, we're not going to get to, be able to employ people or to have the sort of public services and all the other things that we want if we try and do it by shrinking the economy. Growth actually creates the wealth that allows more sustainable behaviours to be afforded. And I think one very impressive thing about the UK, I think since about I can't remember exactly the dates, but since the early 2000s, we've reduced our carbon footprint by about 40%, and the economy's grown by about 120%. So you can have growth and reduce the carbon footprint. And in fact, the hardest thing to do is to try and do that from it's developing countries and low growth economies that will find it hardest. So our job, I think, is to help grow the economy in a more sustainable direction. And rather than keep talking about Unilever, albeit they deserve all the credit they get, it would be fantastic if there were 50 companies that we were talking about that are doing the same sort of thing. And I think we see with Microsoft and Google and Sainsbury and many, many others, all of them setting very, very ambitious targets to both grow and improve their carbon footprint. And there are other sustainability practices too. So the two things are not mutually exclusive. So I feel we should not be shy about this as a business. We're about growth, but we're about achieving better and more sustainable growth.
I think as well, just from what you're saying, Stephen, when you're kind of talking about Extinction Rebellion and the approach, is that we can look at campaigns or activism like Extinction Rebellion and Who Made My Clothes, which was one that came out after the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh. But the people who are activists are consumers as well, and ultimately a lot of the time they're asking for answers. They are asking you questions, they're asking brands questions, and they may not necessarily be a target audience for your brand or for your client, but they are people who are asking genuine questions that they want a response to a lot of the time, you know, with regards to kind of Extinction Rebellion's manifestos, Who Made My Clothes manifestos, using that and taking what is it that people are asking for us. They're not making the decisions and they don't have the opportunity to make decisions, but they're demanding we do things differently. And so taking some of that, you know, being able to take that and looking at your client's brief or client's requests is actually giving you an opportunity to change the brief. And there's a great company, I think many of you have probably heard of, or organization called Purpose Disruptors, and their campaign is about changing the brief. How can you take what your brand or your client is asking you to do and marry that up in a way that responds to consumer demands or customer demands or public demands, alongside how can you take on board their you know, their sustainability policies or their charters or their roadmaps, and build all of that into the way that you respond to the brief. Because everything out there, again, it's about not necessarily having to have all of the answers ourselves. The questions are already put to us in many ways from consumers. So it's really about how can we respond to that and use that to shape the way that we respond to our briefs, or shape the way that we help our clients communicate their message. Because it all comes down to that communications piece, whether it's...
I think just to echo that, Anna,
yeah.
the Change the Brief initiative will be in our action plan.
Brilliant.
It is absolutely
so simple. It's so simple.
Yeah, you know, that's a great example, I think, of a grassroots idea that will really change the business, particularly if, you know, if half the briefs that are done under the Change the Brief campaign, you know, banner come to life, then that will make a really big difference. So, you know, a lot of this is in our control now.
Yeah, exactly. It's what is within your sphere of control, what is within your area of control. What can you put in front of people? What can you make happen? Where is your reach? And then using that as kind of your key kickoff starting point. What can I touch, and what can I make a difference, and how can I be responsible for this in a meaningful way?
Thank you. I've got another question for Barry, and that is, really during COVID, we've had a big reduction in things like airline travel and other forms of travel, which presumably have had some beneficial impact on the whole environment. But could you put that in context? Is it a big thing, or is it just a tiny thing? And do you think there's some behaviours that have developed over COVID that will have longer term benefits?
I think most specialists would tell you that there's no such thing as a tiny thing in these issues. Sort of everything matters. And I don't have the facts and figures to hand, but airline travel is a fairly significant contributor to global greenhouse gases, but far less, for example, than the agriculture sector, which one doesn't normally think about. You know, you do think about industrial issues, but it is a significant polluter, is a significant producer of greenhouse gases, and I think from the surveys I've seen today that they're expecting it's going to take 2 to 3 years at least before the travel industry, and particularly airline industry, recovers. So I guess the short answer to your question is that everything matters. I think it's the whole point. In terms of lasting impact on greenhouse gases, yeah, it's important, but there are other things that would be well ahead of it, let's say, including agriculture.
Thanks, Barry. We've got only 3 or 4 minutes left. Does anyone who's attending?
Yeah, I had a question that came in from Jose earlier on, and if that's Jose Portuguese, I'm not sure, but he asked the question: doesn't plastic pollution appear in the responses? And it's a really good question, because yes, it does. I just cut off my chart at the top 5 just for simplicity, but plastic waste comes up as a very high-ranking issue, just a shade under poverty. Interestingly, though, it hasn't moved forward as an issue over the last couple of years so much, and I think that it's one of those issues that got huge amounts of media attention a couple of years ago and has not had quite the same level of public exposure. So these things do move around a bit, but plastic waste is, yes, it's a huge issue, and it's not just at the big scale that you think of it. It's not just those great heaps that you see in the neutral. It's also the vast number of billions of pieces of microplastics that are filtering their way in through the oceans into the diet of fish and so on. So plastics are still there as a big issue. They just come a little behind some of the other ones I pointed out earlier on.
Thanks, Barry. Would any of the other panelists like to just have a little summation? Last chance to comment.
I feel like I've done enough talking.
Just to reiterate again, please come and join us on November the 18th, and the Alliance will distribute the invite. But literally, we want as many people as possible, and please ask all your staff to join as well, because I think they'll all feel. I hope they'll all feel inspired that we're finally doing something, and it'll only work if we all get behind it.
Brilliant.
All
Thanks,
I was going to say is just that it's all about collaboration. The IPCC say that you need radical collaboration cross-sector to achieve climate targets. Ad Green are collaborating across the whole advertising industry. We're doing it across the events industry. To achieve what we need to do, it's upstream, downstream, and with peers. So whether you're collaborating with your competitors on a pitch or however it is, to make the change we need, we just all need to, collaborate heavily.
Thanks, Ben. So that just leads me to thank our panelists for a really fascinating insight into where sustainability has come. Even during COVID, it's still there on the agenda, and it's still significantly important. As Stephen said, it's a big, big issue coming down at us. So I really do thank the panel for their contribution, and thank everyone for coming. Our next GreenJam is in 2 weeks' time, and it's on a very, very different topic. We've been asked to explore the world of copywriting, the art of copywriting, and the ability to recognize good copy, to attach good copy to brands, to understand brands through copy, etc. And I think it's a real skill that everyone needs to know perhaps a little bit more about, how words impact emotion, how words can actually establish brands. And that's in just 2 weeks' time. I think it'll start at 5 o'clock on the 3rd of November. So everyone welcome to that, and we hope to see you there. So again, big thank you to our panelists today for a really insightful session. Thank you very much indeed.